Despite the strong force the Turkish government had on the Armenians, there were many people who refused to comply with those Turks during this time. The first of those heroes was Hasan Mazhar Bey. Mazhar Bey protected the Ankara Armenian community by refusing to follow the deportation orders against them. He said, and I quote, "I am a vali, not a bandit. I cannot do this. Let someone else come and sit in my chair to carry out these orders." Mazhar Bey was then removed from his office post in August 1915. Next was Faik Ali Azonsoy Bey. Faik Ali was the governor of Kütahya, the central Anatolian province. He was given deportation orders from Istanbul, but refused to implement them. He ordered the deported Armenians that arrived in Kütahya to not go anywhere and to be treated well. Faik Ali was summoned to Istanbul to explain his subordination. While he was gone, the police chief of Kütahya, Kemal Bey, took the opportunity to threaten local Armenians to convert their religion to Islam or be deported. Most Armenians converted, and when Faik Ali returned to Kütahya, he was enraged by Kemal. Kemal was removed from his post. Faik Ali then asked the Armenians if they still wanted to convert to Islam, and all but one remained Christian. Faik was never removed from his post and protected the Armenian population of Kütahya, except for the one who converted to Islam, who was deported. Lastly was Mehmed Celal Bey. Celal was the governor of the Ottoman Vilayet of Konya, and was a symbol of defiance in the face of official orders during the Armenian Genocide. Konya was an area of deportation of Armenians from the western Ottoman towns who get sent on death marches to the Syrian deserts. When Celal was in power, he saved thousands of Armenians from deportation. At the beginning of World War I, he was the governor of Aleppo, and when the Armenian deportation began, he assumed it was just temporary measures as a result of the war. As he said in his memoirs, "I never imagined that any government could take upon itself to annihilate its own citizens in this manner, in effect destroying its human capital, which must be seen as the country's greatest treasure." It took a while for Celal to figure out the deportations of Armenians were meant to exterminate them, and once he knew it was not temporary, he requested funds to build homes for Armenians to settle in. Celal was willing to take serious risks to try to stop the killings of Armenians, and refused to deport Armenians of Antioch. Members of the parliament, Krikor Zorhab and Vardakiz Serlegulian, were sent to Diyarbakir for a trial, but Celal arranged for them to stay in Aleppo. As said in his memoirs, "I could not send them to death with my own hands. I wrote to Istanbul, asking that they would be allowed to stay in Aleppo. I didn't receive any answer, but I promised them that I will not let them go while I'm in Aleppo, and I kept my word." Once Celal left, Zorhab and Varkiz were dispatched and murdered before they went to Diyarbakir. Celal stated in his personal letter to the Minister of the Interior, Talat, "Working toward the destruction of Armenians will be a loss for the country, which will be impossible to compensate for ages. If all our enemies of the world came together and pondered for months the best way to harm us, they couldn't imagine a greater evil." He traveled to Istanbul to express his views on the situation. He shared concerns of the fate of the Armenians, as well as orders he received with the United States and Italian councils in Aleppo, asking to convey the seriousness of the situation to their governments, and to use the influence they had at the Sublime Porte to prevent the massacres from continuing. Celal also appealed to the German council in Aleppo with the same request, yet neither the German council nor those at Istanbul listened to his plea. Celal stated he couldn't partake in these events considered harmful to the country. The Central Committee of Union and Progress threatened Celal with dismissal if he didn't give up his personal opinion for the national ideal. He replied, "Calling such atrocities a national ideal is the biggest insult and defamation for the nation." Celal continued to pressure and succeeded to keep nearly 30,000 Armenians in Konya. October 3rd, 1915, Celal was removed from office. Then the deportation of 10,000 Armenians to Konya was reported by local authorities within 3 days. In November 1919, Celal was appointed governor of Adana of French control. Then after he was appointed to mayor of Istanbul from July 1921 to March 1922. He has stated to negotiates, "It is not possible to deny or twist the question. The goal was extermination, and they were exterminated." The world has reacted to and tried to resolve the genocide aftermath. The Armenian Genocide, the Essential Reference Guide by Alan Whitehorn, documents European and American actions to the genocide. May 24th, 1915, the allies of Tsarist Russia, Britain, and France issued a formal warning stating they will personally hold responsible all members of the Ottoman Young Turk government that were involved in the crimes against humanity. This warning unfortunately did not stop the Ottoman regime from their genocide, but would become a landmark human rights declaration and pioneering step in the formation of international law. October 1918, the Ottoman military surrendered, reaching the end of the Great War. The end of the First World War brought hope of a new era to relieve the Armenians, but the Armenians would need overseas international organizations to provide humanitarian assistance after the atrocities. The major European powers decided to release many young Turk officials too, in exchange for the release of British prisoners. A part of the Paris Peace Treaty process was discussing the fate of the Armenians. At that time, United States President Woodrow Wilson outlined his vision for a more peaceful and just world with his 14 points, where the 12th clause assured nationalities under Turkey's rule would be assured of security of life and autonomous development. August 10th, 1920, the Treaty of Sevres was signed by the Allied powers in Turkey, yet not fully ratified. This treaty was to address the injustices of the crimes against humanity, which include the following. Article 142 resolved the issue of forced religion conversions, massacres, and disappearances. Article 144 examined properties taken during the events and properties of those who died or disappeared. Article 145 plans to provide democratic representation for the minorities in a post-World War I Turkish nation. Article 228 tells Turkey to fill out documents for the prosecution of offenders. And finally, Article 230, those who are guilty of the massacres would go for a tribunal or for court. They mention a clean way to resolve many issues is an independent Armenian nation that will house refugees and orphans. President Wilson was in charge, working on a proposal for an arbitration award which would delineate the land and borders for a new, stable, and viable Armenian homeland. This report was completed November 22nd, 1920, but was stillborn or was not fully developed. On the other hand, Turkish nationalism would reawaken. Mustafa Kemal, later called Ataturk, the Turkish nationalist military hero of Gallipoli, opposed treaties that would weaken the Ottoman Empire. He favored the Treaty of Lausanne, which stated the Turkish war crimes and Armenian nationhood were ignored. The Armenian people were greatly disappointed by the turn in international diplomacy. August 22nd, 1939, Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler declared in a speech, "Who today, after all, speaks of the annihilation of the Armenians?" Hitler believed if there was an aggressive imperialistic war, he could get away with mass genocide. David Harris, CEO of American Jewish Committee, gave his thoughts in a blog posted April 26, 2021, where he accounts the AJC leaders after the Second World War who testified to the United States Congress in 1950, saying if there had been laws punishing the act of genocide, not only will Turkish rulers who ordered the exterminations could have been brought to justice, but Hitler would have known that he could not commit genocide with impunity or with the freedom from punishment. Despite the reactions to the atrocities, there has been a lasting effect on the genocide to this day. David Harris, in his aforementioned blog, displays Turkey's views of the events and their denial of the facts and any historical responsibility for the tragedy. He states how important it is to name these events a genocide. Something fundamental was missing. That something was honesty, sacrificed on the altar of political expediency. David recounts on a call asking why he and the Armenian Jewish Committee were so active to commenting on the Armenian genocide and why this should be a Jewish concern. He replied saying how Jews are victims of genocide. It would be wrong to ignore or minimize the mass targeting of people. That victims of genocide must stand up for one another and educate next generations on man's capacity for inhumanity and be warnings for future crimes against humanity. David exclaims, "If we allow Turkey to ignore and whitewash history, trouble can come from them acting like the events never happened." He notes, however, luckily, there is evidence of these events. A telegram to the State Department from the U.S. ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, Henry Morgenthau Sr., on July 16, 1915, warning the deportation against peaceful Armenians. A campaign of race extermination is in progress under a pretext of reprisal against rebellion. There's also a comment from Winston Churchill on the matter when the Turkish government began to carry out their massacres on the Armenians in Asia Minor. The clearance of the race from Asia Minor was about as complete as such an act on a scale so great it could well be. The reaction of the genocide has been mixed throughout different countries, even for today. In 1941, seeking to describe the German atrocities during World War II, Winston Churchill said, "We are in a presence of a crime without a name." The AJC took inspiration from Raphael Lemkin, Polish Jew and lawyer, who coined the term genocide when creating a word that had not previously existed in international vocabulary and took inspiration from the Armenian genocide and the Holocaust. Raphael was also a driving force for the drafting and adoption of the Genocide Convention by United Nations member states and supported by AJC. As of this time, the term genocide was formed, yet was not used to describe the events to the Armenians. December 12, 2019, the United States Senate expressed how it is U.S. policy to commemorate the Armenian genocide through official recognition and remembrance. This resolution states it is U.S. policy to 1. Commemorate the Armenian genocide done by the Ottoman Empire from 1915 to 1923. 2. Reject efforts to deny the existence of the Armenian genocide or any genocide. And 3. Encourage education and public understanding about the Armenian genocide. While the Senate recognizes these events as a genocide, the then President Donald Trump mentions the events as 1.5 million Armenians deported, massacred, or marched to their deaths by rule of the Ottoman Empire. He never called it a genocide. Why? Previous American presidents, too, have prevented stating these events as a genocide. Then President Bill Clinton wrote a letter to the then House Speaker Dennis Hastert saying, "We have significant interest in this troubled region of the world. Consideration of the resolution at this sensitive time will negatively affect those interests and could undermine efforts to encourage improved relations between Armenia and Turkey." Since past President Clinton's account, the United States-Turkey alliance has decayed. This was the Ottoman Empire. It was not modern-day Turkey. They should be able to recognize that historical fact and move on, but they're unwilling to do so, said Senator Robert Menendez. When the United States House honored and noted these events as a genocide, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan noted the vote as worthless. More than that, Mr. Erdogan described it as the biggest insult to Turkish people as the vote happened on Turkey's National Day. On the contrary, the Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan praised the vote as a bold step towards serving truth and historical justice. The United States House votes resulted in 405 to 11 in favor. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi joined her colleagues, quote, "in solemn remembrance of one of the greatest atrocities of the 20th century." The then presidential candidate Joe Biden tweeted, "By acknowledging this genocide, we honor the memory of its victims and vow never again." The chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, whose California district is home to a large Armenian American population, tweeted, quote, "The House just voted to recognize the Armenian genocide, a vote I fought for 19 years to make possible that tens of thousands of Armenian American constituents have waited decades to see. We will not be party to genocide denial. We will not be silent. We will never forget. Previous attempts to pass the vote were thwarted by concerns that it could damage relations with Turkey, a NATO ally, and intense lobbying by the Turkish government. Reactions of the US House's decision were not liked. Turkey strongly condemned the move. Turkish President Mr. Erdogan said the Turkish parliament would respond to the House vote, saying, quote, "This step which was taken is worthless and we do not recognize it." Earlier, Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu called the House vote null and void and was revenge for the offensive in Syria. Armenia's government, who has long campaigned for international recognition of the event as a genocide, took a different view. Their foreign ministry thanked the United States lawmakers for their overwhelming commitment to truth and justice and humanity. The then United States ambassador to Turkey, David Satterfield, was then summoned by the Turkish foreign minister over the matter whether or not genocide was the question centered on the vote. Many historians, governments, and the Armenian people believe the actions were genocide, although there have been many scholars who question this. Turkish officials accept the fact that atrocities were committed, but argue there was no systematic attempt to destroy the Christian Armenian people, as not only Christian Armenian people died, but also many innocent Muslim Turks in the turmoil of war. April 24th, 2021, then President Joe Biden, on Armenian Remembrance Day, gave a statement recognizing the Armenian genocide, giving details of the Armenian people, their deportation and deaths, to mourn and honor them. David Harris points this out, hoping Israel joins the countries that classified those events as the Armenian genocide. Turkey, however, has threatened Israeli and Jewish interests. Even in Whitehorn's novel, the Turkish nation has threatened and acted against governments who recognize the Armenian genocide. David states, however, with the memory of the Holocaust, Israel should understand the recognitional impacts more than Turkey's thuggish behavior. Winston Churchill even said in 1940, "A nation that forgets its past has no future."